Hello, psych majors. This is the last of the two-part lectures on cancer this semester. So let me go ahead and pull up that PowerPoint. Wow, weird being at the end of the semester in March as I'm recording. All right, the most feared disease is cancer. Now it might be COVID. I might be speaking way too early, but historically before COVID, the most feared disease was cancer. Cancer is the second leading cause of death. It accounts for 23% of all mortality. And in our lifetimes, this is some scary statistics, 50%, one half of you guys will have cancer, and 1/3 of us women will have cancer. The most common cancer for women after lung cancer is breast cancer. For guys, it would be prostate cancer. So sex-related cancer risk for men and women. The risks are higher for men than they are for women for two reasons. One is that historically men have engaged in more risky behaviors than women, but a lot of this actually has to do with genetics. So with us gals having XX chromosomes, if there is any kind of error on one of the X chromosomes, our other X chromosome can compensate for that. But for you guys with X and Y, if there's a chromosomal issue on either X or Y that has the possibility of spinning out cancer, that's going to make you guys more at risk. So textbook definition of cancer, we're really talking about 100+ diseases of uncontrolled cell growth or abnormal cells. And so we can get uncontrolled cell growth that is not necessarily cancerous. So an example would be a mole or a beauty mark. Could be some uncontrolled growth of highly pigmented cells that is not at all dangerous and is not cancerous. But in this particular case, we're talking about uncontrolled growth of abnormal cells that are cancerous, because all of our cells everywhere in our body, every organ in our body is contained of cells. It is possible for us to get cancer anywhere, absolutely anywhere in the body. I don't mean to scare you. This is just reality. And it is because of either an inherited genetic mutation, like inheriting one of the BRCA genes that tends to cause breast cancer and ovarian cancer, or it could be an acquired genetic mutation. So one example of acquired could be too much UV light exposure, creating melanoma in the skin. Or it could be being around a nuclear power plant that melts down, that radiation causing cancer, stuff like that would be acquired. Our cells are always regenerating. And so our cells are always dying and our cells are always regenerating. When we are much younger, that process happens very rapidly. So think of how quickly little teeny babies, how fast they grow. And think about how, cute their skin and all their organs are nice and healthy, joints and everything. As we age, our ability to rejuvenate those new cells tends to slow down. So one of the risk factors over time in developing cancer is simply aging. So I want us to think about oncogenes and suppressor genes. These are genes inside every cell that either tell the cell, hey, replicate, it's time to replicate, or puts sort of the brakes on replication. And an oncogene is, I want you to think of an oncogene like an accelerator in a car. It speeds up the car. The oncogene says, ooh, replicate, replicate, replicate. The homeostasis in that, the normal homeostasis, is you've got these suppressor genes that act very much like a brake in a car. The suppressor genes are like, whoa, 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 slow down replication. Now, so we've got this homeostasis, we've got this accelerator, and we've got this braking system. And you can see in the word oncogene, the accelerating system, that's at the roots of the word oncology. So oncology treats cancer, hematology treats blood cancer like leukemias. So in that homeostasis, the double whammy is we can get either an injury to an oncogene or we can get an injury to the suppressor gene. And either one of those can create out of control cell replication in cancer. Okay, there are four major types of cancer, and I'm only talking about the four major types here that are most commonly seen in humans. The absolute most common are the carcinomas. And the carcinomas are when the epithelial cells in different organs in the body replicate out of control these abnormal cells. And this is the majority of all adult cancers. This is the stuff you've heard about. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon, lung, pancreas, skin. Those are carcinomas. After that, human beings are more likely to acquire sarcomas. And again, that's only 2% of cancers, and that is going to affect muscles, bone, or cartilage. Lymphoma is when individuals get cancer in the lymph system, that is the drainage and communication system throughout the body. And then leukemias are when individuals get blood or bone marrow cancer. So inside the bone marrow where we make our red and white blood cells, when there is uncontrolled cell growth in that bone marrow, that would be a leukemia. So some more textbook terms to kind of get our language down. Malignant means that a fastly replicating cell is cancerous. It is bad. Benign would mean that you could have fastly replicating cells, but they are not cancerous. So back to that example of that, that beauty mark or that mole, that is a lot of extra pigmented cells, but it is not at all harmful. Tumor is the term for when these uncontrolled cells are in a mass. So I've got a picture there of tumor. You can sort of see how it's not symmetrical. It is obviously replicating quickly in lots of different areas, but it's still in a solid mass. Metastasis is when wherever the original place that cancer growth started, it has now seeped out into the bloodstream, or it has seeped out into the lymph system and then gotten into the bloodstream and then circulated throughout the body and metastasized and dropped off cancer somewhere else other than the original organ where the cancer started. And then we call those breaking out metastasized cells mets. And depending on where the cancer originates in the body, the oncologist and hematologist will stage the cancer in level of severity in numerous levels of staging, depending on where the organ it started in. So the first level of staging is if there is a solid tumor, how big is the tumor? And obviously bigger tumors are going to be more dangerous than smaller tumors. After that is wherever the original tumor leaked out and into the lymph system, how many lymph nodes has it affected? So in breast cancer, we would be thinking about lymph nodes in the armpits and how many are affected. The more that are affected, the more dangerous it can be, because the more likely it has metastasized to other places. And then some cancers are staged in 3 stages, some are stage 4. It just depends. The more stages you're going through, the higher the number, the worse the cancer is, the worse the prognosis is. And so the third would be, how many other places is this cancer showing up? Okay. All right. When we look for men and women, what I really want us to pay attention to here are what is at the top of the list for both guys and gals. And it is 30% of cancer deaths in men are lung and bronchial. 26% in women are lung and bronchial. And that, I think you know this by now, is mainly attributed to cigarette smoking or inhaling secondhand smoke for people in the United States. So in theory, all of that leading cancer death for both men and women is preventable if individuals were not using tobacco. After that, we get to the sex organ-oriented types of cancer. We've got 9% in prostate, and then colon and rectal cancer in men. After the lung and bronchial for women, we've got the breast cancer, and then the colon rectal. And then don't worry a whole lot about the others. I just really want you to know that stuff that is up at the top there. Again, lifetime probability for developing cancer in men is 1 in 2, 50-50. And if we look at probability, the highest probability for men lifetime risk is prostate cancer. And in theory, all men, if they lived long enough, would develop prostate cancer. All women, let's go to the women here next. You see the 1 in 3, the 33%, and 1 in 8 breast cancer for women. In theory, if all of us women lived long enough, we would develop breast cancer. Now, keep in mind, men can and do develop breast cancer. Women develop it much more frequently than men. Okay. Next slide. What I want us to pay attention to in this slide is this is looking over the last century and beyond, the prevalence of cancer. And keep in mind, it's per 100,000 individuals. So it's a rate. And remember, in epidemiology, we trust the rates. And what we see here is, first of all, I want to pay attention to the aqua light blue line for stomach cancer. We saw back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, when none of us were alive, a dramatic decline in stomach cancer. A lot of that had to do with the fact that people in the United States learned how to preserve food, particularly refrigeration, and how to preserve food without having to smoke the food, without having to brine the food, or find other ways of kind of preserving, particularly meats, in a way that used to be really harsh on our digestive system and create cancers. Second thing I want you paying attention to is look what happened in the 50s and 60s in that increase, in that acceleration in lung and bronchial cancer. And for those of you who are fans of the show Mad Men, Mad Men was about the advertising industry in New York City, in Manhattan, which is actually based on accurate depictions of all of the advertising that the tobacco companies they bought these big firms and they did fancy advertising, and they got lots and lots of people smoking and buying their brand. And remember, when we talked about smoking, we talked about how loyal people are to their brand. You start to see some downtick in the 80s and 90s for cancer death rates. Some of that is a function of less people smoking relative to how many people were smoking before them. Some of that is a function that we've gotten better in our treatments for cancer, lung and bronchial cancer. Some of that has to do with we've gotten better at prevention, of being able to, if people are having issues, they're former smokers, getting chest x-rays, being able to diagnose lung cancer sooner than later, which oftentimes saves lives. We have looked at some of these pictures when we covered the smoking lecture, but I just want to show you some of them again. Doctors being advertised as recommending cigarette smoking. We've got, I guess he's a handsome dude down there on the Kent cigarettes. Babies recommending, whoops, let me go back. Babies recommending what types of cigarettes mommy should enjoy. And then you've heard my, I can get on a whole rant about what Virginia Slims did back in the 50s and the 60s in advertising to women, and then attaching to women's body image vulnerabilities and encouraging women to have their own Slim cigarettes in advertising. Overall, I show you this particular chart because I want you to know that every now and then we get really, really scared because, again, most feared disease, although I know we got COVID going on. Overall, cancer deaths, when we actually look at rates, are rather stable. We are not seeing these big increases other than the lung and bronchial cancer, which has an explanation that has to do with people firsthand or secondhand smoking. Don't worry about this is pretty blurry, and I'm really not going to point to any particular thing, but I just want you to understand that the way that we study outcome when it comes to cancer is we look at survival rates. So after diagnosis, in a certain level of staging, how many people survive 1 year, how many people survive 3 years, how many people survive 5 years, how many people survive 10 years, that type of thing. And we use those survival rates to help us gauge how effective we are in treatments and early detection and prevention. So when we look at what causes those genetic anomalies to oncogene suppressor genes, we see viruses implicated in quite a few cancers. So HPV, human papilloma virus, is the virus that causes cervical and uterine cancer in women. We can transmit HPV sexually with sexual intercourse. We can transmit HPV orally. Michael Douglas, the actor, has survived oral cancer, and he's pretty confident that he acquired HPV by engaging in oral sex with partners or partners who had HPV. Hepatitis B is a virus that can create risk for liver cancer. And then Helicobacter pylori is a bacteria that can be found in higher rates in individuals who have GERD. They have that reflux. It's found in higher rates in individuals who have developed stomach ulcers. And nowadays, so when people are complaining of reflux or they're complaining of stomach pain that ends up being ulcers, not only do they put them on medications that block acid production, but they also screen and swab for this bacteria. And if they're positive for this bacteria, then they treat people for it. So we've got these pathogens, bacteria and viruses. Other genetic mutations we can inherit, like BRCA genes that run both in men and women, but the BRCA genes tend to create more havoc in women in creating high risk for breast cancer, high risk for ovarian cancer. We can acquire the genetic mutations. And so thinking about being exposed to too much UV light, which there's a really interesting generational effect that has been occurring when it comes to exposure to sunlight. Your generation, you youngsters out there, you had parents that put sunscreen on you. I know I put sunscreen on my kids. Everybody sort of knew this is the thing you wanted to do when they were out exposed, especially if you're at the beach or at the pool. My generation, my parents, when I was a little girl, we would go to the beach. That was our family vacation place. They would oil me up with baby oil. Sometimes there was iodine in it. That had no sunscreen in it whatsoever, and they just like plop me in the sand. And I jokingly say that my parents had a little white baby, but they wanted a little brown baby that I wasn't. But it wasn't just me. It was all the parents at that point in time. Me and my friends, many of us who are high risk for melanoma because of that, because we had so much sun exposure when we were young without sunscreen. Many of us go to our dermatologist either yearly or every 6 months, or in some cases, really high risk people, they will even go once a month or once every couple of months to have dermatologists screen and take out any cells that look suspicious that could be dysplastic, that could either be cancerous or could be precancerous. So it's a joke among me and our friends whenever we visit our dermatologist, how many holes we have when we come out of that office in the stuff that they have removed. Carcinogens, remember when we covered this in the smoking lecture, are the chemicals that can create genetic mutation and can spur out cancerous cells. So the more we are exposed to carcinogens, the more at risk for cancers we are going to be. And then remember we talked about how in the smoking lecture, there are many known carcinogens that cannot be easily cleansed that drive all of the cancers that we spin out from smoking. So anything that can mutate those oncogenes or those suppressor genes has the ability to create cancers. So known carcinogens, we've talked about the cigarette smoking, either active smoking or the passive smoking. You also get risk with cigars and smokeless tobacco. There is known risk from vaping for potential cancer in the future. And whether it's vaping tobacco or it's vaping marijuana, there is potential risk for future cancer from those things. We know that saturated fat, which is the fat that is oftentimes found in red meat And then some processed meats, particularly if that meat is cooked at a very high temperature. So what you definitely would not want to do, if you've got a steak on the grill and that fat is dripping, you would not want to consume that, that dripping saturated fat. That could be very dangerous to consume. Alcohol is a known carcinogen, and creates higher risk of certain cancers for individuals. Being exposed to radiation. Our house, we've got this porch that surrounds our house, and then it goes into a crawl space. And a lot of people around here in Boone get their houses tested. This house was tested, and in the crawl space, they found coming out of the rocks of the earth radon. And so we have a system where there's a constant fan running under the crawl space and pulling that radon up into a pipe, up into the air, so that we are not breathing it here in our home. So radon mitigation. And then some people even have their water mitigated for radon if their water tests positive for it. That's a little less common around here than radon coming out of these rock walls in our climate here. And then any kind of toxic chemical exposure. We know that coal miners who have been exposed and develop black lung are a lot more likely to have cancers, usually starting in the lung or the mouth, because of their exposure to dust in the coal mines. We know that shipyard workers who would work and have airborne asbestos, as an example, they are going to be at higher risk because they've been breathing carcinogens. Protective factors, we have covered this already when we have covered nutrition, but I do want to kind of walk through these protective factors. I have known a lot of individuals that after they've been diagnosed with cancer get very vigilant about a lot of lifestyle behaviors, including changing their diet and making sure that they're getting much better nutrition as their bodies are fighting cancer, as well as exercise, stress management, all that kind of stuff, starting yoga, that thing. So here's some of the nutrition stuff. Limiting saturated and trans fats, making sure that we are getting those spices that are really healthy for us. So things like from the onion family, garlic, ginger, different curries, different pigmented spices. And remember, rainbow diet, the more pigmented spices are, the healthier they tend to be for us. And so think about different colored curries. Green curries, red curries, yellow curries. For those of you who like cooking with turmeric, turmeric is the spice that I love the taste of it in Indian and Thai food, is the yellow spice that will even stain your Tupperware. It kind of turns yellow over time, can't get the yellow out. We want to increase antioxidants, because antioxidants are the molecules that can find cancerous cells and help remove them from the body. So again, consuming lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of pigment, getting that like beta carotene, vitamin A, vitamin E, that kind of stuff. We want to make sure that our diets are more full of plant-based liquid at room temperature fats, as well as we know that the fats that come from certain kinds of fish and flaxseed, those fats are much healthier for us than the fats that come from animal products. They're more likely to drive cancer rates. We know that getting exercise on a regular basis is a really good thing. It keeps our immune system humming along at a nice 15%. It is really important during this time when we've got COVID spreading that we are doing everything that we can do to maximize the health of our immune system in case we get this this particular virus. Green tea is healthy to drink, maintaining healthy body weight, limiting sun exposure or wearing sunscreen when we are out exposed. And then here are all the list of foods that you have seen before that kind of fit in that rainbow diet. Stress and immunocompetence. We have talked about this a little bit way back this semester when we talked about stress and coping and how stress can affect our immune system. We know that all of us, whether or not we have had diagnosed cancer, all of us have had cancer cells in our body. Now, I don't mean to scare you, but I just want to kind of talk about what is really reality here. That all of us have had cancer cells, but if we have a healthy immune system, it recognizes abnormal cancer cells just like it can recognize viruses, just like it can recognize bacteria and other pathogens. A healthy immune system is going to find those cells and get rid of those cells before it creates an actual cancer. Chronic stress, like we talked about, remember the little mice that it would have to swim in the bucket, the poor mice that would just, they'd be injected with cancer and they'd have to swim and swim and swim for their life. And if they stopped swimming or they fell asleep, they would drown and die, compared to the mice that lived in the normal nice environment. That chronic stress, we know in those animal models, and then we see it also in human research, that chronic stress takes the energy from the normal healthy immune system. So the immune system gets down regulated. And when that happens, cancer has the possibility of continuing to replicate and to grow. Research is in its infancy, but we've got a lot of support that chronic stress is really bad for both animals and mammals like we human beings. Okay, from a public health approach, and I may need to move if the rain gets really loud. Let me see if I can move right now and find a place where it's a little bit less noisy, but you can still see me, because it can get a little loud with the rain on the windows there. Okay, so I think I found a new place. I hope you can see me well enough. We have made our biggest headway in being able to help people survive cancer by secondary prevention. Secondary prevention meaning a public health approach that of getting out there and screening individuals and trying to catch cancer early. Okay. Most of our cancer rates have been very stable across recent human history, other than the smoking and the lung and bronchial cancer. And you saw that graph a little bit earlier. Treatment, certainly there have been treatment advances in terms of medications, treatment advances in terms of surgeries, and chemotherapies, which are the meds that treat cancer. But overall, the treatment hasn't had the biggest impact. It is the secondary prevention, the screening, catching cancers early, being able to get those cancers out of the body, whether that be surgical removal of tumors, whether it be radiation, where there's radiation going through and burning and killing cancer cells in the body, or whether it be chemotherapy that kills both healthy cells and cancer cells. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the 5-year survival rate has been increasing as long as we catch the cancers early. Part of the reason why we're talking about cancer in a health site class, though, is that the screening is going to require human behavior. It's going to require the actual consumers either doing the self-screening, so like doing a self-breast exam for women. Men should actually be doing that too. Or a healthcare provider recommending that their patients get the screening. So as an example, the number one reason why women of certain age go and get a mammogram is because their doctor or their nurse practitioner or their PA recommends that it's time for them to go get a mammogram. So women are a lot more likely to get their mammogram if their healthcare professional has recommended that. So these are some of the screening guidelines. I want you to know that the American Cancer Society sets up the guidelines for how often people who have access to healthcare should be getting these screenings. And you can look this stuff up. I'm going to talk about some of these, though, because these are some of the most common screeners for men and women. Cervical cancer, the best way of screening for cervical cancer is for women who are sexually active. A yearly pap test starting at age 21 every 3 years after that. So every 3 years after the age of 21. And you women in this class, you know what this is about. You guys, I don't know if you do or not, but we go in there, we get the little paper schmata. We set our legs in the stirrups. Doctor puts in a device that kind of dilates, and then they go in and scrape off cells from the cervix, send them off to a pathology lab. And then we find out, are those cells absolutely healthy and normal? Are those cells by chance dysplastic, showing precancer? If women are getting regular PAPs, they usually don't have full-blown cancer cells. If any of those cells are dysplastic and are precancerous, there's several different procedures that OBGYNs can do to treat those cervical cells. Remember, the cervix is the opening of the uterus. And so now, as long as women are getting their PAPs and their screens, and then they're getting treatment if there are any problems with those cells, it is rare for us to see uterine cancer grow out of cervical cancer that could possibly grow into pelvic cancer for women. So again, women with regular access to healthcare. When it comes to breast cancer, women, most of the breast cancers get detected by the women themselves. I have a friend, well, I've had several friends who've been through breast cancer, but one of my friends just said she remembers being on the road visiting relatives, putting lotion on her body and realizing that she felt something, and then examined very carefully. And indeed, she was the one who found her own tumor. And thank goodness she found it early enough, because she is a cancer survivor. So most women, I would ask you, if you're live, what time of the month are we supposed to do this? Ladies in the class, and you guys might as well check your breasts too, because men do get breast cancer. For women, it is after their menstrual period. And the reason for that is premenstrually, a lot of women hold water in their breasts, which is why breasts can kind of get swollen and tender premenstrually before their periods. But after the periods, that water releases, and so the breasts are going to be more plious. If women are checking themselves at that particular time, they're more likely, if there's something there to find, they're going to find it. Many women who have premenstrual water gain, if they are checking their breasts before their menstrual periods, they're going to feel stuff that are really just these watery cysts, these nodules that aren't necessarily tumors or cancerous growth. Ideally, women are getting their clinical exam, having their healthcare provider check their exams. Also every 3 years, usually all that's done with the annual exam, the PAP and the breast. And then there has been some controversy about when women are supposed to get their mammograms. And I was in the generation where they started encouraging mammograms after the age of 40. Before that, it was only women after the age of 50, and then they dropped the age down to 40. And then after examining the data on how accurate mammograms were for women in their 40s at catching breast cancer early versus how many false positives they've had, they found there were so many false positives for women when they were getting mammograms starting at 40, then starting at 50. I have had many friends that have had breast cancer scares, as an example, false positives, because they started their mammography early. Testicular cancer, it's young guys. So prostate cancer is an old guy cancer. Testicular cancer is a young guy type of cancer, and you see it is the leading cause of death malignancies in young men, so men ages 20 to 34. I've got a picture here. I realize there's something missing in that anatomy there, but this is an example of a man checking himself, checking his testicles for nodules. You can look up on YouTube how to do self-breast exam, how to do the testicular exam. I highly recommend everybody in here is checking requisite body parts, just to make sure if you find something that is at all concerning, go to your healthcare provider and notify them. Prostate cancer is diagnosed with a blood test, and the blood test has a lot of inaccuracies in it. So they can look for this protein in the blood. Most men, they recommend they start screening them with both the blood tests after the age of 40, and then they also check with a digital exam. The digital exam is where they have individuals, of course, gloved and lubed. They go in through the rectum and they feel the prostate, and they feel if it is enlarged or not. If it is enlarged, then they will oftentimes recommend more testing like a scan to see how much hypertrophy or enlargement there is in that prostate. Got a fun story here. My friend's sister is an oncologist hematologist, and she works for the VA system. Ooh. I'm going to exit because weird things are happening with my sound. So into part one.